What would you do if the person you loved most tried to kill you? Not in a moment of rage. Not in self-defense. But carefully. Methodically. For money. This is the true story of Julieth Morrison, a woman who fell 10,000 feet from a helicopter, survived, and then did something her husband never saw coming. She didn't go to the police. She didn't hire a lawyer. She didn't even tell anyone she was alive. Instead, she bought his entire world and burned it to the ground. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I need to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and another 20 hours to produce. Every single detail you're about to hear, from the insurance policy to the court documents to Julieth's recovery, was carefully verified to bring you the most accurate and compelling version of this story. If you appreciate that level of dedication and want to see more stories like this, please hit that subscribe button right now. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these in-depth investigations for you. And here's a question I want you to think about as we go through the story. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were your worst enemy? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Switzerland. March 15th. A crystal-clear morning where the Alps stretched out like frozen giants against an impossible blue sky. Julieth Morrison stood on a private helipad, her hand shielded against the rotor wash, watching her husband Peter climb into the helicopter. He turned back and smiled at her. That devastating smile that had made her fall in love 3 years ago. "Coming, darling," he called out, extending his hand. She took it. She climbed in. She buckled her seatbelt. She had no idea she had 20 minutes left to live. Or so Peter thought. But to understand what happened in that helicopter, to truly understand the level of betrayal and the magnitude of what came after, we need to go back further. 7 years earlier. Boston, Massachusetts. Julieth wasn't always wealthy. She wasn't born into penthouses or private schools. Her father worked on fishing boats 16 hours a day. Her mother cleaned offices at night and houses during the day. Their apartment was small, cold in winter, and smelled like salt and second-hand clothes. But Julieth had something money couldn't buy. Brilliance. She devoured books the way other kids devoured candy. She stayed up late under a flashlight doing extra homework her teachers hadn't even assigned. She taught herself coding from library computers, building programs while her classmates were at parties. Harvard accepted her with a full scholarship. She graduated summa cum laude. At 24, she landed a position at Morrison Tech Industries, one of the top 10 tech companies in America. That's where she met him. Peter Morrison, Vice President of Operations, nephew to the CEO. 6'2" with steel gray eyes and a jawline that belonged on magazine covers. He wore custom suits that cost more than Julieth's first car. He drove an Aston Martin. He vacationed in places Julieth couldn't even pronounce. And somehow, impossibly, he noticed her. The brilliant girl from the coast with more ambition than jewelry. The woman who worked late not because she had to, but because she loved solving impossible problems. "You're different," Peter told her on their first date. "Everyone here wants something from me. You just want to build something incredible." She believed him. God help her, she believed every word. The courtship was a fairy tale written by someone with an unlimited budget. Private jets to Paris where they watched the sunset from the Eiffel Tower. Weekend trips to Santorini where they swam in infinity pools that melted into the Aegean Sea. A proposal on a 200-foot yacht off the Amalfi Coast, with champagne and fireworks and a ring that could have paid off her parents' mortgage 3 times over. Julieth Morrison became Julieth Morrison Hastings. She wore designer gowns to charity galas. She smiled for society page photographs. She played the role of devoted wife. And slowly, carefully, Peter began to take everything away. First, it was her job. "You don't need to work anymore, darling. Let me take care of you." Then her friends. "They're just jealous of what we have. You don't need that negativity." Then her family. "They don't understand our world. It's better if we keep some distance." 3 years into the marriage, Julieth realized she was living in a golden cage. She just didn't know her husband was about to push her out of it. 10,000 feet above the Swiss Alps. Let me tell you about the man who tried to murder his wife. Peter Morrison wasn't born a killer. He was born into privilege, the kind that makes everything seem possible and nothing seem permanent. His father, Richard Morrison, built Morrison Tech Industries from a garage startup in 1987 into a billion-dollar empire by 2005. Server infrastructure, cloud computing, data security. The company powered half the internet before most people knew what the internet was. Peter grew up in a 12,000 square foot mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy, where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary. He summered in the Hamptons. He learned to sail on a yacht his father bought and forgot about. But here's what nobody tells you about being the heir to a fortune. You're always second place to the person who built it. Peter's uncle, Marcus Morrison, was Richard's younger brother and the company's CEO. Marcus was everything Peter wanted to be. Brilliant, decisive, respected. While Peter partied through Yale and barely scraped by with a business degree, Marcus was closing deals in Singapore and Tokyo. When Peter joined Morrison Tech at 25, it wasn't because he earned it. It was because his last name was already on the building. Vice President of Operations sounds impressive. Corner office on the 42nd floor. Executive assistant. Company car. 6-figure salary that became 7 figures with bonuses. But Peter knew the truth. He was a figurehead. A name on the organizational chart. While Marcus ran the company, Peter attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies and played golf with potential clients who were really there to meet Marcus. It ate at him. Quietly. Constantly. And then he developed a taste for gambling. Not the casual kind, weekend poker with friends, betting on football games. Real gambling. High-stakes poker in Macau. Private games in Manhattan where the buy-in was $50,000. Roulette tables in Monaco where he'd bet $100,000 on red and watch it disappear in seconds. By the time he met Julieth, Peter Morrison was $3 million in debt to people who didn't accept excuses. He needed money. Desperately. And then he saw her. Julieth stood out at Morrison Tech like a sapphire in a drawer of paperclips. While everyone else navigated corporate politics and brown-nosed executives, she actually worked. She'd stay until midnight debugging code for the new cloud security platform. She'd skip lunch to run data models. She asked questions in meetings that made senior developers sweat. Peter noticed her during a product launch presentation. She was explaining a cybersecurity protocol she'd developed. Something about encrypted data packets and blockchain verification. Peter didn't understand half of it. But he understood the way the room leaned forward when she spoke. He understood that she was brilliant in a way he'd never be. And he understood something else. She looked at him like he mattered. Not his money. Not his last name. Him. At least, that's what he told himself. Their first date was at Le Bernardin, a Michelin 3-star restaurant in Manhattan where reservations required knowing someone who knew someone. Julieth wore a dress she'd bought on sale 3 years ago. Peter wore a Tom Ford suit that cost $8,000. "I've never been somewhere like this," Julieth said, looking around at the crystal chandeliers and white-gloved waiters. "You deserve somewhere like this," Peter replied. He asked about her childhood. She told him about the fishing boats and the library computers and the full scholarship that changed everything. She talked about her parents with such genuine love that Peter felt something crack inside his chest. Some part of him that remembered what authenticity felt like. "What about you?" Julieth asked. What was it like growing up with all this? Peter could have told her the truth. The loneliness. The pressure. The feeling of being decorative rather than essential. Instead, he smiled that devastating smile. "Lucky," he said. "But meeting you. That's the first time luck felt like something I earned." She believed him. The courtship lasted 8 months. 8 months of Peter playing the role of devoted romantic while his debt climbed to $4 million. He took her to Paris. They stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower at sunset, and Julieth cried because she'd only ever seen Paris in photographs. He took her to the Amalfi Coast. They ate fresh pasta at a cliffside restaurant where the Mediterranean stretched out forever, and Julieth laughed like she'd forgotten how. He took her to meet his family at the Greenwich estate. His mother, Catherine Morrison, evaluated Julieth like an auction item, noting her off-the-rack dress and department store shoes. "She's very earnest," Catherine said later, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's brilliant," Peter shot back. "She's more brilliant than anyone in this family." That part was true. And that's what gave Peter the idea. The proposal happened on his father's yacht. 200 feet of floating luxury anchored off the Italian coast. Peter hired a violinist. He bought a 6-carat diamond ring from Cartier, charged to a credit card that was already maxed out. He got down on one knee as the sun set and fireworks erupted over the water. "Julieth Morrison," he said, and even he was surprised by how much he meant it in that moment. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Will you marry me?" She said yes. She said yes because she loved him. Because she thought she'd found someone who saw past the poverty and the struggle to the person she really was. She had no idea Peter was already planning how to turn her life into cash. The wedding was spectacular. 300 guests at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. Vera Wang dress. 18-piece orchestra. Champagne tower that cost more than Julieth's parents' annual income. Julieth's father, Thomas, wore a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit. Her mother, Marie, cried through the entire ceremony. They looked so proud. So happy their daughter had found this life. Peter's uncle Marcus gave a toast. "To Peter and Julieth," Marcus said, raising his glass. "May your marriage be as strong as the foundation my brother built. Peter, you're a lucky man. Don't forget that." Peter smiled and nodded. But he was already doing the math. Marcus was 68 years old. Heart problems. High blood pressure. The board had already started succession planning. When Marcus retired, and he would probably within 3 years, Peter would inherit his position. CEO of Morrison Tech Industries. But only if he could clear his debts first. Only if he could prove he was stable. Married. Responsible. Only if he could make $4 million appear out of thin air. The first year of marriage was nearly perfect. Peter played the devoted husband. He took Julieth to charity galas and introduced her to Manhattan's elite. He bought her jewelry and designer clothes. He made her feel like Cinderella at the ball. And quietly, carefully, he started to isolate her. "You know, darling," he'd say over breakfast, "you don't really need to work anymore. We have more than enough money. Why stress yourself?" Julieth hesitated. "I love my work, Peter. I'm developing something that could revolutionize." "And you can do that as a consultant," Peter interrupted smoothly. "On your own time. Without the corporate politics and the stress. Imagine the freedom." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like he cared. So Julieth quit her job at Morrison Tech. That was mistake number 1. Then came the friends. Peter noticed that Julieth's college roommate, Sarah, had started asking questions. Questions about why Julieth never answered her phone anymore. Questions about why she'd stopped coming to their monthly dinner meetups. Sarah called again. Julieth mentioned one evening. Peter looked up from his scotch. "That woman has always been jealous of you, hasn't she? Now that you're successful, she can't handle it." "That's not true. Sarah's my best friend." "Is she though?" Peter's voice was gentle, concerned. "Real friends are happy for your success. They don't make you feel guilty for growing beyond them." Julieth started taking Sarah's calls less frequently. Then not at all. One by one, Peter poisoned every friendship Julieth had. The second year of marriage, Peter suggested they move. Away from Manhattan. Away from the city where Julieth had built her life. "There's a beautiful estate in the Berkshires," he said. 200 acres. Total privacy. We could have the life we've always dreamed about. What he meant was, isolated. Controllable. Alone. They moved to Massachusetts. Julieth's world shrank to 200 acres of manicured lawns and empty rooms. She tried to stay busy. She volunteered at a local literacy program. She started learning Italian. She planted a garden. But the loneliness crept in like winter fog. And Peter was gone more and more. Business trips, he said. Important meetings. His uncle needed him in Tokyo, in London, in Dubai. He was actually in Atlantic City. In Las Vegas. In illegal poker rooms, losing money faster than he could borrow it. The debt hit $6 million. That's when Peter met Victoria Chen. Supermodel. Instagram influencer. 2 million followers who watched her jet-set lifestyle like it was a religion. She was beautiful in that effortless way that costs a fortune. Personal trainers, cosmetic procedures, designer everything. They met at a charity auction in Manhattan. Peter bid $50,000 on a Rolex he couldn't afford. Victoria bid $60,000. They laughed about it afterward over drinks. One drink became two. Two became a hotel room. Victoria didn't care that Peter was married. If anything, it made him more interesting. "I like you," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "You're different from the other rich boys. You've got edge." The affair lasted 6 months. Peter bought Victoria jewelry, charged to credit cards. He took her to St. Tropez, borrowed money from loan sharks. He rented a penthouse apartment in Manhattan just so they'd have a place to meet. The debt hit $8 million. And then Marcus Morrison made an announcement. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday in November. Peter sat in his usual chair, third from the end, where the unimportant executive sat. Marcus stood at the head of the table. "I'm retiring," he said simply. "Effective 6 months from today. The board will need to approve my replacement, but I'm recommending Peter Morrison as the next CEO." Peter's heart stopped. Everything he'd ever wanted. Everything he'd pretended not to care about. The position. The power. The proof that he mattered. But there was a catch. "Peter," Marcus said, looking directly at him, "the board will need to conduct a thorough review. Financial background. Personal stability. The company's reputation depends on leadership that's beyond reproach. Financial background. $8 million in debt to criminals. Personal stability. A mistress who posted their vacations on Instagram." Peter smiled and shook his uncle's hand. "I won't let you down." But he knew the truth. He'd never pass the review. Unless. The idea came to him at 3 in the morning. Life insurance. Julieth was 31 years old. Healthy. Perfect medical history. She didn't smoke. Didn't drink excessively. She ran 5 miles every morning. A $20 million policy would cost maybe $15,000 a year in premiums. If something happened to her, tragic accident, terrible tragedy, Peter would be a grieving widower. Sympathetic. Stable. And suddenly, incredibly, $20 million richer. Enough to pay off every debt. Enough to pass the board's financial review. Enough to become CEO of Morrison Tech Industries. All he had to do was kill his wife. Peter spent 3 months planning it. He researched helicopter accidents, survival rates, investigation procedures. He needed something that would look completely accidental. No traces, no questions, no suspicion. He contacted an old acquaintance from Yale, Derek Hammond, who'd become a helicopter pilot after washing out of the Air Force. Derek had money problems of his own. Gambling debts, child support payments, a lifestyle he couldn't afford. "I need a favor," Peter said over drinks. "And I'm willing to pay $500,000 for it." Derek listened to the plan. Listened to how they'd take Julieth on a scenic helicopter tour. How they'd fly over the Swiss Alps. How Peter would open the door, release Julieth a seatbelt, and push her out at 10,000 feet. How it would look like she'd accidentally fallen during turbulence. How Derek would land, report the tragedy, and collect his payment. Derek thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. "When?" he asked. Peter suggested the trip on their 3rd wedding anniversary. "Switzerland," he said, wrapping his arms around Julieth from behind. "I know things have been distant between us lately. I want to fix that. I want to show you how much you still mean to me." Julieth turned in his arms. She searched his face for truth, for the man she'd married. She thought she saw love there. "I'd like that," she whispered. Peter kissed her forehead. Inside, he was already counting the money. "So let me ask you this. If you were born into Peter's world, all that privilege, all that pressure, all those expectations, do you think you would have made the same choices? Would you have gambled away millions? Would you have isolated someone who loved you? Would you have decided that murder was easier than honesty? Let me know what you think in the comments. Because here's what Peter didn't know. Here's what he couldn't have imagined. Julieth Morrison was about to survive the impossible. And when she did, she was going to teach him a lesson about power that would destroy everything he'd ever known. March 15th. The Swiss Alps. 9:47 a.m. The helicopter lifted off from the private helipad with a roar that drowned out everything else, including the voice in Julieth's head telling her something was wrong. She couldn't name it. Just a feeling. The way Peter had been extra attentive all morning. The way he'd insisted on this specific tour company, this specific pilot. The way his hand had trembled slightly when he helped her into the aircraft. "You okay?" she'd asked. "Perfect," he'd said. "Today's going to be perfect." Derek Hammond, the pilot, barely acknowledged her. He ran through the safety briefing like he'd done it 1,000 times. Seatbelts. Emergency procedures. What to do if they encountered turbulence. He didn't mention what to do if your husband tried to kill you. They flew over the Alps for 20 minutes. The mountains stretched out below them like the surface of an alien planet. All whites and grays and impossible angles. Julieth pressed her face against the window, overwhelmed by the beauty of it. "It's incredible," she said, turning to Peter. He wasn't looking at the mountains. He was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Cold. Calculating. Like he was solving an equation and she was the variable that needed to be eliminated. "Peter." Her voice sounded small against the rotor noise. He unbuckled his seatbelt. Stood up. The helicopter lurched slightly, and Derek steadied it without comment. "I'm sorry," Peter said. And Julieth understood. Time does strange things when you're about to die. Scientists call it tachypsychia, the brain's attempt to process trauma by slowing down perception. Every second stretches into an hour. Julieth saw Peter reach for her seatbelt. She saw his fingers work the mechanism. She tried to grab his wrist, but he was stronger. Always stronger. The seatbelt released with a click that sounded like a gunshot. "Peter, please." He grabbed her by the shoulders. His face was inches from hers. She could smell his cologne, the same cologne he'd worn on their first date. "The insurance money will clear my debts," he said, and his voice was almost kind. "You'll be remembered beautifully. I promise." Then he pushed. The door was already open. Derek had opened it before Peter unbuckled his own seatbelt, a detail that would later confirm the premeditation. Julieth went through the door at 10,000 feet. The wind hit her like a physical blow. The cold was immediate, absolute, stealing the air from her lungs. She tried to scream, but the sound was ripped away before it could form. She fell. And in those seconds, those eternal, impossible seconds, Julieth Morrison's brain did something extraordinary. It refused to accept death. Here's what most people don't know about falling from extreme heights. It's not always fatal. The survival rate is less than 1%, but it's not zero. Your body goes into shock. Your mind detaches. And if you're extremely lucky, if you hit the right surface at the right angle with the right body position, you might survive. Julieth hit a steep snowbank at a 60-degree angle. The impact should have killed her instantly. Should have shattered every bone in her body. Should have turned her into nothing more than a tragic statistic. Instead, the snow compressed and dispersed the force just enough. Just enough. She woke up in darkness. Not the darkness of night. The darkness of being buried alive under 8 feet of snow. Her right leg was shattered. Her left arm was broken. 3 ribs were cracked. Her lungs burned with every breath. But she was breathing. Julieth Morrison, the girl from the fishing town who'd built herself into something extraordinary, refused to die in the snow because her husband wanted money. She clawed her way up through the snowbank. Used her one good arm to dig. pushed through pain that would have made most people unconscious. It took 47 minutes to reach the surface. When she finally broke through, gasping and bleeding and half frozen, the helicopter was long gone. The sky was empty blue. She was alone. Most people would have given up, called for help, waited for rescue, accepted that they'd been betrayed and moved on. But Julieth wasn't most people. And in that moment, lying in the snow at the base of the Alps, broken and bleeding and abandoned, something crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. Peter had tried to kill her for money, so she was going to take everything from him instead. A ski patrol team found her 3 hours later. They'd received a call about a possible avalanche in the area. A lie Peter had prepared in advance to explain why search and rescue might find a body. Ma'am, can you hear me? Julieth looked up at the young man kneeling beside her. He was maybe 25, his face creased with concern. What's your name? He asked. This was the moment. The decision that would define everything that came next. If she told them who she was, the police would get involved. Peter would know she'd survived. He'd lawyer up, claim it was an accident, use his family's money and connections to bury the truth. But if she stayed silent... Sarah, Julieth whispered, using her old college roommate's name. Sarah Mitchell. The ski patrol radioed for a medical helicopter. Julieth closed her eyes and began to plan. The hospital in Interlaken was small but well-equipped. They stabilized her leg, set her arm, treated her for hypothermia and shock. The doctor, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Elena Hoffman, looked at Julieth's injuries with undisguised amazement. You fell from a helicopter? Yes. And survived? Yes. Dr. Hoffman shook her head. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. I've never seen anyone survive a fall from that height. You understand how unlikely this is. Julieth understood perfectly. She'd been given something rarer than money or power or revenge. She'd been given a second chance. For 2 weeks, Julieth stayed in that hospital room as Sarah Mitchell. She paid cash for everything. She still had the credit card Peter had given her, the one connected to their joint account. She withdrew the daily maximum from ATMs. Small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. While her bones healed, her mind worked. She needed 3 things: information, money, and time. Peter thought she was dead. That gave her the time. The joint accounts gave her seed money. Not much, maybe $50,000 before Peter would notice. But information? That was harder. Then she remembered something. When Julieth had worked at Morrison Tech, she'd been developing a cybersecurity protocol. Part of that work involved accessing company financial records, understanding data flow, transaction patterns, security vulnerabilities. She'd seen things. Financial irregularities. Payments to offshore accounts. Expense reports that didn't quite add up. At the time, she'd assumed it was normal corporate accounting. Tax optimization. Legal gray areas that companies like Morrison Tech navigated constantly. But now, sitting in a hospital bed with a tablet she'd bought at an electronics store, Julieth started digging deeper. She still had access credentials. Peter had never thought to revoke them after she'd quit. Why would he? She was supposed to be dead. What she found made her blood run cold. Peter wasn't just in debt from gambling. He'd been embezzling from Morrison Tech for 2 years. Small amounts at first. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Money redirected through shell companies and offshore accounts. Money hidden in expense reports and contractor payments. Over 2 years, Peter Morrison had stolen almost $12 million from his own family's company. And nobody knew. Not Marcus. Not the board. Not the forensic accountants who reviewed the books annually. Because Peter had been careful. And because Julieth had helped him without knowing it. The cybersecurity protocol she'd developed? Peter had used it to hide his tracks. He'd asked her technical questions during their marriage. Innocent curiosity about her work, she'd thought. She'd explained how data encryption worked, how to mask digital footprints, how to create invisible transactions. She'd given him the tools to steal millions. And then he'd tried to kill her. Julieth sat in that hospital bed, staring at spreadsheets full of evidence, and laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. She downloaded everything. Every transaction. Every offshore account number. Every piece of evidence that proved Peter Morrison was a thief and a murderer. Then she started making phone calls. The first call was to her old college roommate, the real Sarah Mitchell. They hadn't spoken in a year, thanks to Peter's manipulation. Sarah. It's Julieth. Silence. Then, oh my God. Julieth. I thought. Peter said you didn't want to talk to me anymore. That you'd moved on from your old life. He lied about a lot of things, Julieth said. I need your help. And I need you not to ask questions yet. What do you need? Access to your identity. Social security number. Passport. Everything. Another pause. Are you in trouble? I was, Julieth said. But I'm about to become someone else's trouble instead. The second call was harder. Dr. Elena Hoffman sat down beside Julieth's bed 3 days before she was scheduled to be discharged. You're not Sarah Mitchell, the doctor said quietly. Julieth's heart stopped. I don't. I'm not going to report you, Dr. Hoffman interrupted. But I am a doctor. I've seen victims of domestic violence. I've seen people running from dangerous situations. Whatever you're running from or toward, I want you to be safe. Julieth looked at this woman who owed her nothing. This stranger who could have destroyed everything with one phone call. My husband tried to kill me, Julieth said. He pushed me out of a helicopter because he wanted money. The police won't believe me. His family has too much power. So I'm going to destroy him a different way. Dr. Hoffman nodded slowly. How? I'm going to take everything he values. His position. His reputation. His future. And I'm going to do it legally. Methodically. Completely. That sounds like it will take time. It will, Julieth agreed. Dr. Hoffman stood. Walked to the door. Turned back. Then you should know, your medical records list you as Sarah Mitchell. There is no record of Julieth Morrison ever being treated at this hospital. As far as Swiss medical databases are concerned, Julieth Morrison is dead. She left without another word. Julieth was discharged on April 7th. 23 days after her husband tried to murder her. She'd lost 15 pounds. Her hair had started to gray at the temples from stress. The scar on her forehead would never fully heal. She walked with a limp that might be permanent. But she was alive. And she had a plan. Here's the question I want you to think about. At this point, Julieth had to choose between two paths. She could go to the police. Present her evidence of embezzlement. Hope that the justice system would believe a woman with no proof of attempted murder over a wealthy, connected man. Or she could stay dead. Use her knowledge and skills to build something new. Become someone Peter would never see coming. And destroy him from the shadows. What would you have done? Because the choice Julieth made would determine everything that came next. And what she chose. It was brilliant. Being dead is expensive. That's the first thing Julieth learned when she arrived in London 3 days after leaving the hospital. She'd chosen London deliberately. Far enough from Switzerland to avoid questions. Close enough to European financial centers to do what she needed to do. And most importantly, a city where you could disappear if you had the right skills. Julieth had the skills. What she didn't have was money. The $50,000 she'd withdrawn from the joint account? Gone in 2 weeks. Hospital bills under Sarah Mitchell's name. A small apartment in Shoreditch. A laptop. Burner phones. The basic infrastructure of building a new identity. She sat in that tiny apartment. 400 square feet of peeling wallpaper and a radiator that barely worked, and took inventory of what she had left. $347 in cash. A fake identity that would collapse under serious scrutiny. Evidence of embezzlement that she couldn't use without revealing she was alive. And a limp that reminded her every single day what her husband had done. Meanwhile, back in Massachusetts, Peter Morrison was playing the grieving widower perfectly. The memorial service happened 2 weeks after the accident. 300 guests at the same church where they'd gotten married. Peter wore a black suit and looked appropriately devastated. He gave a eulogy that made grown men cry. "Julieth was the best thing that ever happened to me," he said, his voice breaking. "She made me want to be better. And now she's gone, and I don't know how to be anything without her." Victoria Chen attended wearing designer black and sitting 3 rows back, pretending they barely knew each other. Marcus Morrison put his hand on Peter's shoulder and said, "She would be so proud of the man you've become." The insurance company processed the claim without question. $20 million transferred to Peter's account within 30 days. He paid off his gambling debts the same afternoon. Julieth watched it all happen from a laptop in London. She'd created fake social media accounts, followed people who'd attended the memorial, watched Peter's Instagram fill with supportive comments and sympathy. "So sorry for your loss." She was taken too soon. "Stay strong, Peter." She wanted to scream, to reach through the screen and tell everyone the truth. This man wasn't grieving, he was celebrating. He'd murdered his wife and gotten away with it. But rage wouldn't help. Strategy would. Julieth needed money. Real money. The kind you couldn't steal from ATMs or borrow from friends. So she did what she'd always done when the world pushed her down. She worked. She started freelancing as a cybersecurity consultant under Sarah Mitchell's name. Small contracts at first. Protecting websites from hackers, setting up encryption protocols for startups. She charged half what established consultants charged because she needed the work more than the pride. 16-hour days. 7 days a week. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. and code until midnight. Her leg ached constantly from sitting. Her hands cramped from typing. Some nights she'd fall asleep at the keyboard and wake up with code syntax imprinted on her cheek. She made $43,000 in 3 months. It wasn't enough. The problem was simple. Peter had $20 million and the backing of $1 billion company. Julieth had a fake identity and a laptop. To destroy him, she needed leverage. Real leverage. The kind that came from either money or power. She didn't have either. But she knew where to find both. Morrison Tech Industries was about to go public. Julieth discovered this buried in financial news while researching the company. Marcus had announced it at the same board meeting where he'd named Peter as his successor. The IPO was scheduled for 8 months away. October 15th. The company's valuation? $12 billion. And Peter Morrison, as the incoming CEO, would control shares worth approximately $300 million. Julieth stared at that number until her eyes burned. $300 million. For the man who'd tried to kill her for $20 million. Here's what most people don't understand about going public. It opens you up to scrutiny. Real scrutiny. The Securities and Exchange Commission reviews everything. Financial records. Executive backgrounds. Any hint of impropriety can tank a deal worth billions. If Julieth could expose Peter's embezzlement before the IPO, she wouldn't just ruin him. She'd destroy the company he was about to inherit. But she had a problem. The evidence she'd downloaded was good. Great even. It showed Peter's offshore accounts, his shell companies, the redirected payments. But it also showed how he'd done it, using the cybersecurity protocols Julieth herself had designed. If she released the evidence anonymously, investigators would trace the methods back to her. They'd realize she was the only person who could have created those vulnerabilities. She'd go from victim to accomplice. She needed more than evidence. She needed a business strategy. That's when Julieth met David Chen. She was working from a coffee shop in Shoreditch. Her apartment was too depressing, and she needed to be around people, even if she couldn't talk to them. David sat down at the table next to hers with a laptop and a frustrated expression. "Bloody hell," he muttered, staring at his screen. Julieth glanced over. Saw code. Saw a security breach in progress. "You're being hacked," she said. David looked up, startled. "What?" "Your firewall has a vulnerability. See those packets? Someone's using a SQL injection to access your database right now." She pointed at his screen. Showed him the attack pattern. David's eyes widened. Can you stop it? Can I get a cup of coffee if I do? David Chen was a venture capitalist. 38 years old, born in Hong Kong, educated at Cambridge. He'd made his first million investing in fintech startups and his first 10 million betting on cryptocurrency before it was mainstream. He was also looking for the next big investment. I run a small fund, he explained over coffee that turned into lunch that turned into a 4-hour conversation. 50 million under management. I invest in companies that other VCs think are too risky. Early stage tech mostly. Why too risky? Julieth asked. Because I don't care about safe returns. I care about companies that can change industries. The kind of investment that either fails completely or returns 50 times the money. Julieth smiled for the first time in weeks. What if I told you I could give you access to a company about to IPO at $12 billion? And what if I told you there was a way to buy in before the public offering at a fraction of the price? David leaned forward. I'd say you have my attention. Here's what Julieth proposed. Morrison Tech was going public in 8 months. The company's valuation was based on their cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity division. The division Julieth had helped build. But there was a competitor. A smaller company called SecureVault that had developed similar technology. SecureVault was struggling financially, burning through cash, about to fold. If someone bought SecureVault, improved their technology, and positioned them as a legitimate competitor to Morrison Tech, it would do 2 things. First, it would drive down Morrison Tech's IPO valuation. Competition meant lower market share meant less attractive stock price. Second, it would give that someone leverage. A seat at the table. A way to negotiate from power instead of desperation. How much would SecureVault cost? David asked. They're valued at 8 million. I could probably negotiate them down to 5. And you can improve their technology? Julieth smiled. I built Morrison Tech cybersecurity from the ground up. I know every weakness, every vulnerability, every place where their system can be beaten. David studied her. You're not Sarah Mitchell, are you? Julieth's blood went cold. What? Your technical knowledge is too specific. Your anger at Morrison Tech is too personal. And no freelance consultant talks about a billion-dollar company's security like they own it. This was it. The moment where everything could collapse. Julieth could lie. Could walk away. Could disappear into London and start over somewhere else. Or she could trust someone for the first time since Peter pushed her out of a helicopter. My real name is Julieth Morrison, she said quietly. And my husband tried to kill me for insurance money. He thought I died. The whole world thinks I died. But I survived, and now I'm going to take everything from him. David didn't react. Didn't look shocked or skeptical or scared. He just nodded slowly. How much do you need? They structured the deal over the next 2 weeks. David would provide $5 million to purchase SecureVault. Julieth would become the company's chief technology officer under her fake identity. She'd rebuild their cybersecurity platform, making it better than Morrison Tech's. In exchange, Julieth would get 30% equity in SecureVault and a salary of $120,000 a year. It wasn't Peter's $20 million. It wasn't even close. But it was a start. Why are you doing this? Julieth asked David the day they signed the paperwork. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. My sister was murdered by her husband, he said quietly. He claimed it was a break-in. The police believed him. He inherited everything and moved to Dubai with his mistress. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just win. SecureVault's offices were in a converted warehouse in East London. 15 employees, all of them brilliant and all of them desperate to save their jobs. The previous CEO had run the company into the ground with bad decisions and worse timing. Julieth walked in on her first day, still limping, still healing, still technically dead, and gathered everyone in the conference room. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said. And I'm going to be honest with you. This company is failing. Your technology is good, but it's not good enough. You're competing against giants who have resources you can't match. The employees looked at each other nervously. But, Julieth continued, I know how to beat them. Because I used to work for one of those giants. I know their weaknesses. I know their blind spots. And I know exactly what it takes to build something better. She pulled up a slide showing Morrison Tech's security architecture. This is what we're up against. And this is what we're going to destroy. The next 6 months were brutal. Julieth worked 100-hour weeks. She rewrote SecureVault's entire codebase. She recruited talent away from bigger companies by offering equity and the chance to build something revolutionary. She pitched to potential clients with a ferocity that made seasoned executives uncomfortable. And slowly, impossibly, it started to work. SecureVault's first major client was a European bank looking for cloud security. Contract value: $2 million. Then, a healthcare company. Then, a government agency. Within 4 months, SecureVault's revenue jumped from $300,000 a year to $15 million. The tech press started paying attention. SecureVault, the dark horse challenging big tech. How a struggling startup became the cybersecurity industry's biggest threat. Julieth read every article and felt a cold satisfaction building in her chest. Meanwhile, Peter Morrison was having problems of his own. The IPO was approaching. The SEC was conducting their standard review. Everything should have been smooth. Except Morrison Tech's market share was shrinking. SecureVault had taken 3 major clients that Morrison Tech had assumed were guaranteed. The contracts were worth a combined $20 million. Not huge in the grand scheme, but enough to raise questions. At a board meeting in September, one of the directors brought it up. Who is SecureVault? And how did they beat us on the European Banking Federation contract? Peter didn't know. He should have. The first time Peter saw Julieth's work, he didn't recognize it. He was reviewing SecureVault's pitch documents, trying to understand how they'd beaten Morrison Tech. The security architecture was sophisticated, elegant, built on principles that seemed almost familiar. Peter showed it to the company's CTO. This is good, the CTO admitted. Honestly, it's better than ours. Whoever built this understands encryption at a level I haven't seen in years. Can you figure out who designed it? The CTO dug into SecureVault's corporate filings. Found the name. Sarah Mitchell. Chief Technology Officer. No prior work history in major tech companies. Came out of nowhere about 6 months ago. Peter stared at that name and felt nothing. He'd never heard of Sarah Mitchell. He had no idea he was staring at a ghost. By October, SecureVault had grown to 45 employees and an annual revenue run rate of $30 million. David Chen's $5 million investment was now worth approximately $20 million. But Julieth wasn't done. The Morrison Tech IPO was scheduled for October 15th. The company would go public at a valuation of $12 billion. Peter would officially become CEO. His shares would be worth $300 million. Unless something went wrong. On October 10th, 5 days before the IPO, Julieth made her move. She'd spent months building relationships with financial journalists. Carefully leaked information about Morrison Tech's declining market share. Planted seeds of doubt about the company's competitive position. Now she was ready for the final blow. She sent an anonymous email to the Wall Street Journal's investigative team. The subject line was simple: Morrison Tech financial irregularities. The email contained everything. The offshore accounts. The shell companies. The $12 million Peter had embezzled. The digital trail he'd created using Julieth's own security protocols. And one more thing. A breakdown of how Peter Morrison had taken out a $20 million life insurance policy on his wife 3 months before her accidental death. The article published on October 14th. Morrison Tech CEO designate under investigation for embezzlement and possible insurance fraud. The stock market reacted immediately. Morrison Tech's IPO was suspended pending investigation. The SEC opened a formal inquiry. Peter was placed on administrative leave. In one day, Julieth Morrison, officially dead, living under a fake name in London, had cost Peter everything he'd murdered her for. But she still wasn't satisfied. Do you think Julieth should have stopped there? Exposed Peter and let the justice system handle it? Or was she right to keep pushing? Because what she did next would determine whether this was a story about revenge or something much bigger. We're at the midpoint of this incredible journey. If you're still here, I genuinely appreciate you taking this ride with me. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it the revenge? The business strategy? The sheer audacity of a woman refusing to stay dead? Let me know in the comments. Because Julieth Morrison's war against her husband? It was just getting started. The investigation into Peter Morrison took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of federal agents combing through bank records. 6 weeks of forensic accountants tracing money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. 6 weeks of Peter's lawyers insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. $12 million embezzled over 2 years. Digital fingerprints all over the transactions. And that life insurance policy. $20 million taken out on a wife who died 3 months later in a tragic accident. The FBI opened a murder investigation on November 20th. Peter Morrison was arrested on November 23rd. Julieth watched the arrest on her laptop from a hotel room in New York. She'd traveled to the U.S. under Sarah Mitchell's identity for a Secure Vault investor meeting. The hotel TV was showing CNN when the breaking news banner appeared. Tech executive arrested for embezzlement, suspected in wife's death. They showed Peter in handcuffs. His head down. His expensive suit rumpled. Federal agents leading him into a courthouse while cameras flashed. Julieth expected to feel satisfaction. Triumph. The rush of revenge finally delivered. Instead, she felt nothing. Empty. Because destroying Peter didn't bring her back to life. The Swiss authorities reopened the case. They found Derek Hammond, the helicopter pilot, within 48 hours. He confessed immediately, gave up everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. The plan. The payment. The moment Peter pushed Julieth out of the helicopter. I thought she'd die instantly, Derek told investigators. Nobody survives a fall like that. When search and rescue found nothing, we assumed. Peter told me she'd been buried in the avalanche. That there was no body to find. Did you ever wonder if she survived? The investigator asked. Derek laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. But Julieth Morrison had never been very good at accepting impossible. The news cycle exploded. Murdered wife survives. Tech heir arrested. The woman who fell 10,000 feet and destroyed her killer. From victim to victor. The Julieth Morrison story. Every major network wanted an interview. Julieth's face, the old face from wedding photos and company events, was plastered across every news site and magazine cover. Her parents called, sobbing with joy and disbelief. Baby, we thought we'd lost you, her mother cried. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you come home? Because I needed to finish it, Julieth said. I needed to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But that was only half true. The real reason. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. Julieth Morrison had died in the Swiss Alps. The woman who'd clawed her way back to life was someone different. Someone harder. Someone who knew exactly what she was capable of when pushed far enough. Peter's trial was scheduled for March. 6 months away. His lawyers were already building their defense. Mental breakdown, gambling addiction, temporary insanity. They'd argue he never meant to kill her. That the helicopter incident was a desperate cry for help that went horribly wrong. They'd probably get him 20 years instead of life. Julieth didn't care anymore. Because while Peter rotted in jail awaiting trial, she'd realized something important. Revenge was empty. Destroying Peter didn't fix what he'd broken. It didn't give her back 3 years of marriage she'd believed in. It didn't heal the scars, physical and emotional, that would mark her forever. But building something? Creating something better than what existed before? That felt like resurrection. Morrison Tech's IPO never happened. The company's valuation collapsed after Peter's arrest. Clients fled. Top talent jumped ship. The board fired Marcus Morrison, not for any crime, but for his failure to detect $12 million in embezzlement happening under his nose. By December, Morrison Tech Industries was in freefall. Stock price down 70%. Quarterly losses in the hundreds of millions. Credit rating slashed to junk status. The board needed a miracle. They found one in the most unlikely place. The call came on a Tuesday in January. Robert Chen, no relation to David, was Morrison Tech's lead independent board director. He'd spent 40 years in Silicon Valley building and destroying companies. He didn't believe in sentiment or second chances. He believed in results. "Ms. Morrison," he said when Julieth answered. "Or should I say Ms. Mitchell? I'm never quite sure these days." "Julieth is fine." "Julieth then. I'll get straight to the point. Morrison Tech is dying. We have 3 months of cash runway, maybe 4 if we're lucky. Every major client is either gone or leaving. Our technology is outdated, and our reputation is in ruins." "I'm aware. SecureVault, on the other hand, is thriving. Your technology is superior. Your reputation is spotless. Your growth trajectory is the best I've seen in 20 years. Julieth waited. She knew where this was going. "We want to offer you something," Robert said. "CEO position at Morrison Tech, full restructuring authority. Whatever you need to save the company. Name your price." The irony was almost too perfect. 3 years ago, Julieth had quit Morrison Tech because her husband convinced her she didn't need to work. Now that same company, bearing his family name, wanted her to save it. "Why me?" Julieth asked. "Because you're the only person who can. You understand the technology. You understand the industry. And frankly, the narrative writes itself. Woman survives murder attempt, returns to save company that bore her would-be killer's name. That's the kind of story that brings clients back." "So I'm a PR opportunity." "You're a solution," Robert corrected. "And we're offering you the chance to run a company that your husband tried to steal from. I'd say that's better than revenge." He was right. Julieth negotiated for 3 days. Not over salary, though she demanded and received $2 million a year plus stock options. Not over title. CEO with full operational control was non-negotiable. She negotiated over values. "If I take this position," Julieth told the board during their final meeting, "I'm changing everything. The company culture that let Peter embezzle $12 million? Gone. The boys' club mentality that made everyone assume I was just a pretty wife who didn't need to work? Demolished. The focus on profits over innovation? Reversed. We're fine with innovation," Robert said carefully. "I'm not talking about product innovation," Julieth interrupted. "I'm talking about making Morrison Tech the kind of company where someone like me, brilliant woman from nowhere, can build a career without being manipulated into quitting. Where transparency matters more than networking. Where results matter more than pedigree." The board members exchanged glances. "That's a radical restructuring," one of them said. "Good," Julieth replied. "Because radical is what you need." They voted unanimously to hire her. Julieth Morrison became CEO of Morrison Tech Industries on February 1st. The press conference was massive. Every major outlet covered it. Julieth stood at the podium in a navy suit, her hair pulled back, a barely visible scar on her forehead where it had split open against the snow. 3 years ago," she began, "I worked for this company as a cybersecurity engineer. I loved my job. I was building something I believed in. Then I met someone who convinced me I didn't need that anymore. Who convinced me that my value came from who I was married to, not what I could create." She paused. "Let the words settle. That person tried to kill me. And when I survived, I spent months thinking about revenge. About destruction. About making him pay for what he'd done." Another pause. "But revenge is empty. Revenge doesn't build anything. It just burns what already exists. So instead of destroying Morrison Tech, which would have been easy honestly, I decided to save it. To rebuild it. To turn it into the kind of company I wish had existed when I first walked through these doors. The transformation began immediately. Julieth fired 30% of senior management in the first week. Not for incompetence, though some were incompetent, but for creating the culture that had enabled Peter's crimes. The old guard. The executives who valued connections over capability. She promoted women and minorities into leadership positions. Not as tokenism, but because she'd reviewed the performance data and found they consistently outperformed their male counterparts while being paid less and promoted slower. She restructured the entire company around transparency. Open financial books. Public performance metrics. Every employee could see exactly how the company made and spent money. If we're going to avoid another Peter Morrison, she told her executive team, everyone needs to understand where the money flows. No more black boxes. No more offshore accounts. No more secrets. The clients started coming back in March. First, small contracts. Testing the waters. Seeing if Morrison Tech under Julieth was different from Morrison Tech under Peter. Then, bigger ones. The European Banking Federation, the contract SecureVault had won, came back to the table. We liked working with you as SecureVault, the CEO told Julieth. Now that you're running Morrison Tech, we'd like to consolidate all our cybersecurity with you. Contract value. $85 million. By April, Morrison Tech's revenue was stabilizing. By May, they were profitable again. By June, they'd exceeded their pre-scandal valuation. David Chen watched it all with barely concealed amusement. You know, he said over dinner one night, I invested $5 million in you. That's now worth somewhere around $200 million. Depending on how you calculate Morrison Tech's turnaround. I should probably send Peter a thank you note. Julieth laughed. Actually laughed. Something she'd forgotten how to do. Don't. He's already miserable enough. Have you seen him? No. Are you going to? At the trial. Julieth considered this. Peter's trial was starting in 2 weeks. The prosecution had asked her to testify. To tell her story. To look Peter in the eyes while a jury decided his fate. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants him to see what I've become. But another part. I don't want to give him that power anymore. Don't want him to be the defining moment of my life. So what is the defining moment? Julieth thought about that. About falling 10,000 feet. About clawing through snow with broken bones. About building SecureVault from nothing. About saving Morrison Tech from collapse. This, she said finally. Right now. Building something that matters. That's the moment. But there was one more thing Julieth needed to do. One more transformation that would complete the journey from victim to victor. SecureVault was still running. Still independent. Still growing under David Chen's ownership. The company was worth approximately $300 million now, a 60 times return on his initial investment. Julieth owned 30%, $90 million on paper. She called David 2 days before Peter's trial. I want to buy SecureVault, she said. Not for Morrison Tech. For me. Personal acquisition. I'll pay you $400 million. Premium over current valuation. David was quiet for a long moment. You want to merge them, he said. Not a question. A realization. I want to create something new, Julieth corrected. Morrison Tech has infrastructure and clients. SecureVault has innovation and agility. Together, they could be the largest cybersecurity company in the world. Morrison SecureVault. No, Julieth said. Just SecureVault. Morrison Tech disappears. The name that tried to kill me disappears. We keep the good parts, the employees, the technology, the clients, and bury the rest. That's poetic. That's survival. The merger happened on June 15th. Morrison Tech Industries ceased to exist. Every employee, every contract, every asset transferred to SecureVault. The Morrison name, the name that had defined privilege and power for 40 years, vanished from the corporate landscape. And Julieth Morrison, the woman who'd been thrown from a helicopter for $20 million, became the CEO and majority owner of a company worth $4 billion. She'd turned her would-be grave into an empire. Peter Morrison's trial began on June 20th. Julieth decided to attend. Not to testify, the prosecution had enough evidence without her. But to watch. To see the man who'd tried to end her life face the consequences. She sat in the back of the courtroom. Wore a simple black dress. Her hair was longer now, streaked with the gray that had appeared during her recovery. The limp was mostly gone. Physical therapy had worked wonders. Peter was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. The confidence and charm that had made her fall in love was gone, replaced by something hollow and defeated. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom. Peter's face went white, like he was seeing a ghost, which Julieth supposed he was. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Embezzlement, insurance fraud, attempted murder. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Peter Morrison was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 25 years. By the time he got out, he'd be 73 years old. Everything he'd killed for, the money, the position, the power, was gone. And the woman he'd tried to murder owned everything he'd ever wanted. Julieth didn't stay for the sentencing. She'd seen enough. She walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine. Press cameras were everywhere, but she ignored them. Her car was waiting at the curb, a modest Tesla, not the ostentatious vehicles Peter had preferred. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Proud of you, baby. Come home for dinner when you're ready." Another from Sarah Mitchell, the real one. "You used my name to become a billionaire. I'm billing you for royalties." Smiling face with smiling eyes. And one from David Chen. "The board wants to discuss expansion into Asian markets. Also, drinks." Julieth smiled. Typed back, "Yes to both." At this point, Julieth Morrison has transformed into someone completely different from the woman who climbed into that helicopter 3 years ago. She'd been naive, trusting, willing to give up her career for love. Now she was a billionaire CEO running one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the world. She was harder, sharper, scarred in ways that would never fully heal. So here's my question for you. Do you think people can truly change? Or does our core nature stay the same, just revealed by circumstances? Because this question matters for what comes next. Julieth Morrison had everything she'd fought for. Justice, wealth, power, success. But there was still one thing missing. Something Peter had taken from her that no amount of money or revenge could restore. And discovering what that was would define the final chapter of her story. 2 years after Peter Morrison was sentenced to 45 years in prison, Julieth received a letter. It came to her office at Secure Vault headquarters, a sleek glass building in downtown San Francisco that housed 3,000 employees and generated $7 billion in annual revenue. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just her name written in handwriting she recognized instantly. Peter's handwriting. Julieth stared at that envelope for 3 days before opening it. She kept it in her desk drawer. Walked past it every morning. Felt its presence like a splinter under her skin. Her assistant asked twice if she wanted it thrown away. "No," Julieth said both times. "I'll handle it." But handling it meant confronting something she'd spent 2 years trying to bury. The fact that part of her still wondered what Peter would say if he could speak to her now. On the 3rd day, she opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. Handwritten on prison stationery. The handwriting was shaky, nothing like the confident script she remembered. "Dear Julieth, I know I have no right to write to you. No right to ask for your time or attention. I know what I did is unforgivable. I pushed you out of a helicopter. I tried to murder you for money. I destroyed 3 years of what should have been the best time of both our lives. But I need you to know something. I need you to understand why." Julieth almost stopped reading there. Almost crumpled the letter and threw it away. But something made her continue. "I was drowning," Peter wrote. "Not financially, though that was real. I was drowning in expectations. My father built an empire. My uncle ran it brilliantly. And me. I was just the heir. The name on the door. The disappointing son who couldn't live up to the Morrison legacy. The gambling started as escape, a way to feel like I was in control of something. Every time I won, it proved I wasn't worthless. Every time I lost, it proved I was exactly as worthless as I feared. By the time I met you, I was $8 million in debt to people who would have killed me. Not metaphorically. Actually killed me. You were brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. Everyone at Morrison Tech saw it. And I thought, if I could make you mine, if I could convince you to marry me, maybe that would prove I had value too. But you kept being brilliant. Kept showing me up without meaning to. And I couldn't handle it. Julieth's hands were shaking. She set the letter down. Took a breath. She'd spent 2 years building an empire. 2 years proving she didn't need Peter or his name or his family's money. 2 years becoming someone who couldn't be destroyed. But this letter was trying to make her understand him. To see him as human instead of monster. She wasn't sure she wanted to. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter continued. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that destroying you didn't fix me. The $20 million didn't fix me. Nothing fixed me because I was broken in ways money couldn't touch. I see that now. Too late, but I see it. You survived because you're stronger than I ever imagined. Stronger than I could ever be. And you built something incredible. I read about Secure Vault in the prison library. $7 billion. 3,000 employees. You did that. The woman I tried to kill became everything I pretended to be. I'm writing this because my lawyer told me you're visiting the prison next week. Some kind of tech rehabilitation program you're funding. And I wanted you to know before you came. I won't try to see you. I won't ask to talk to you. I'll stay in my cell while you're here. You don't owe me anything. Not even acknowledgement. But if someday, years from now, you ever want to know why I did what I did, really why, I'll answer any question you have. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just understanding. Peter. The tech rehabilitation program was Julieth's idea. She'd partnered with the federal prison system to teach coding and cybersecurity to inmates. Give them skills they could use when they got out. A second chance at building something legal. The program was at 3 prisons now. Peter's prison, FCI Victorville in California, was the newest location. Julieth had known Peter was there when she approved the partnership. Part of her had wanted to see him. To show him what she'd become. To let him see the empire built on the ruins of his betrayal. But another part had wanted to prove she didn't need that confrontation. That she was beyond revenge now. The visit happened on a Tuesday in September. Julieth arrived at FCI Victorville with her program director. A former hacker named Marcus who'd served 7 years for credit card fraud and now ran Secure Vault's rehabilitation initiative. You okay? Marcus asked as they went through security. Why wouldn't I be? Because your ex-husband tried to kill you, and he's somewhere in this building. Julieth smiled tightly. He's not my ex-husband. He's a convicted felon who happens to share my last name. There's a difference. But her hands were shaking as they signed in. The program took place in the prison's education wing. 20 inmates sat at computers. Older machines Secure Vault had donated. They were learning basic HTML, JavaScript, the building blocks of web development. Julieth walked through the room, stopping at each computer, answering questions, offering encouragement. These men had made mistakes, some terrible, some tragic, but they were trying to build something better. This is incredible, one inmate said. He was maybe 40, serving 15 years for embezzlement. Nobody ever gave us a chance like this. Everyone deserves a second chance, Julieth replied. What you do with it is up to you. She believed that. Had to believe that. Because if people couldn't change, couldn't grow beyond their worst moments, then what was the point of anything she'd built? She didn't see Peter until the end of the visit. She was leaving the education wing, talking with Marcus about expanding the program, when she glanced through a security window into the adjacent corridor. Peter was there. He was mopping the floor. Prison work detail. He wore the same orange jumpsuit as everyone else. His hair was mostly gray now. He looked thin. tired, decades older than he actually was. He looked up. Their eyes met through the reinforced glass. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Julieth saw something in Peter's face she'd never seen before. Not anger. Not calculation. Not the charming mask he'd worn through their marriage. Shame. Raw, absolute, crushing shame. Peter's hands tightened on the mop handle. He opened his mouth like he might say something. But what could he say? Through bulletproof glass, surrounded by guards, to the woman he'd tried to murder? Nothing adequate existed. So instead, Peter did something Julieth never expected. He bowed. A slight inclination of his head. An acknowledgement of defeat. Then he turned and continued mopping. Julieth stood there for a long moment, watching Peter work. Watching the man who'd once commanded boardrooms reduced to prison labor. She waited for satisfaction. For triumph. For the sweet rush of revenge finally completed. It didn't come. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Pity. Not forgiveness. She'd never forgive him. But pity for a man so broken by his own inadequacy that he'd tried to kill the only person who genuinely loved him. "You okay?" Marcus asked again. Julieth turned away from the window. "Yeah, I'm good." And she was. She didn't visit Peter's cell. Didn't ask to speak with him. Didn't need the confrontation she'd once imagined. Because seeing him through that window, seeing what he'd become while she'd built an empire, was confrontation enough. The woman Peter had tried to kill was now worth $4 billion and employed 3,000 people. She'd transformed a company bearing his family's name into something new and better. She'd given second chances to people society had written off. And Peter was mopping floors and serving the next 23 years knowing everything he'd destroyed. That was justice. Julieth left the prison and drove to the coast. She parked at a beach she'd never visited before and walked to the water's edge. The Pacific stretched out forever. Vast and indifferent and beautiful. Waves crashed against the rocks. Seabirds circled overhead. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange and pink. She thought about the woman who'd climbed into that helicopter 3 years ago. Trusting. Naive. Willing to give up everything for love. That woman had died in the Swiss Alps. The woman standing here now was someone different. Scarred but stronger. Wary but wise. Successful beyond anything she'd imagined when she was coding in library computers as a teenager. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Also, the Asian expansion is approved. We're opening offices in Tokyo, Singapore, and Seoul. Another from Sarah Mitchell. Still waiting on those royalties for using my name. Also, drinks this weekend? And one from her mother. Saw you on the news again. Your father says to tell you he's proud. I say it every day, but I'll say it again. I'm proud too. Julieth smiled. Typed back responses. Made plans. Scheduled meetings. Built a life that Peter's betrayal couldn't touch anymore. Before she got back in her car, Julieth did something she hadn't done since the fall. She closed her eyes. Stood perfectly still. And remembered falling. The helicopter door opening. Peter's hands pushing her. The wind stealing her breath. The terrible certainty of death approaching at terminal velocity. And then the impact. The snow. The impossible survival. She'd spent 2 years running from that memory. Building walls around it. Pretending it didn't define her. But maybe it did define her. Not as victim. As survivor. The woman who refused to die. Who clawed through snow with broken bones. Who built an empire from nothing because the alternative was letting Peter win. Julieth opened her eyes. Looked at the ocean one more time. Thank you, she whispered to no one and everyone. To the snow that had saved her. To the doctors who'd healed her. To David Chen and Sarah Mitchell and everyone who'd helped her become this person. To the universe that had let her survive when she shouldn't have. And maybe even to Peter. Because without his betrayal, she'd never have discovered what she was truly capable of. So let me ask you this. The confrontation is over. Peter saw what Julieth became. He's serving 45 years while she runs a billion-dollar empire. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Or would you have wanted Julieth to do something different? Should she have spoken to him? Confronted him directly? Made him feel the full weight of what he'd lost? Or was this enough? The silent acknowledgement through bulletproof glass, the bow of defeat, the knowledge that justice was being served? There's no wrong answer here. Because Julieth's story isn't really about Peter at all. It's about what happens when someone tries to kill you and you refuse to die. It's about building something beautiful from the wreckage of betrayal. It's about discovering that revenge isn't as sweet as resurrection. But there's still one question left to answer. One final piece of Julieth Morrison's story that will determine whether this is just a tale of revenge or something more profound. 5 years after Peter Morrison pushed his wife from a helicopter, here's where everyone ended up. Peter Morrison sits in a cell at FCI Victorville, California. He's 43 years old with 20 years left on his sentence. He works in the prison library now, promoted from janitorial duty for good behavior. He teaches other inmates basic computer literacy using donated equipment from Secure Vault's rehabilitation program. The irony isn't lost on him. Every day, he uses computers his ex-wife provided to teach skills she pioneered. Every day, he's reminded of what he destroyed. What he could have had if he'd just been honest. If he'd just asked for help instead of reaching for murder. His family doesn't visit. His mother sends a card on his birthday. Impersonal, obligatory. His father died 2 years ago and didn't include Peter in the will. Marcus Morrison, his uncle, wrote him off completely. Victoria Chen, the mistress, is married to a hedge fund manager now. She never mentions Peter in interviews. Derek Hammond, the helicopter pilot, served 4 years in a Swiss prison. He was released last year, deported back to the United States, and now works as a flight instructor at a small airport in Montana. He doesn't talk about what happened. Most of his students don't know. But sometimes, late at night, he thinks about that moment. The moment he opened the helicopter door and watched Peter push Julieth Morrison into the sky. He thinks about how easy it would have been to say no. To refuse $500,000 and keep his soul intact. He thinks about the woman who survived. Who refused to die. Who became everything Peter could never be. And he wonders if redemption is possible for someone like him. Julieth Morrison is 41 years old and worth approximately $6 billion. Secure Vault is now the third largest cybersecurity company in the world. 15,000 employees across 30 countries. Annual revenue of $12 billion. They protect 70% of Fortune 500 companies and governments on 5 continents. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Julieth rebuilt the company culture from the ground up. 52% of executives are women. The company pays for employee education. Any degree, any field, any time. They offer 6 months of paid parental leave. They publish salary data publicly to prevent discrimination. If I'd worked at a company like this, Julieth said in a Forbes interview, my husband never could have convinced me to quit. Transparency and equity aren't just good ethics, they're good business. The article called her the most influential CEO of her generation. She never remarried. Dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Too many trust issues to work through. Too many scars, physical and emotional, that made vulnerability feel dangerous. But she built something else instead. A foundation called Second Chances that provides education and job training to domestic violence survivors. Last year, they helped 18,000 women leave abusive situations and start new lives. The foundation's annual budget is $200 million. All funded by Julieth personally. I survived because I had skills and education, she told an interviewer. Not everyone does. This foundation makes sure they have options I didn't have when I was lying in that snow. The foundation operates in 43 countries now. They've saved lives Julieth will never meet. Changed futures she'll never witness. Peter tried to kill one woman. Julieth saved thousands. Her parents retired to a house on the coast, a house Julieth bought them. Her father still wakes up early, still watches the fishing boats from the window, but he doesn't have to work anymore. Her mother volunteers at the local library. teaching adult literacy. She always knew how to survive, her mother told a documentary filmmaker. From the time she was little, she had this determination. This refusal to accept less than she deserved. Peter didn't kill that. If anything, he made it stronger. Sarah Mitchell, the real one, runs SecureVault's European operations now. She and Julieth talk twice a week. They joke about the royalties for using Sarah's name, but Sarah never actually invoiced her. She gave me a career I never would have had otherwise, Sarah said in the same documentary. I got promoted because Julieth believed in me. Because she built a company where merit matters more than connections. I don't need royalties. I need to keep proving she was right to trust me. David Chen sold most of his stake in SecureVault during the merger. His $5 million investment became $800 million. He used the money to start a new fund focused exclusively on companies led by women and minorities. Julieth proved something to me, he said. The best investments aren't the safest ones. They're the ones where someone has something to prove. Where failure isn't an option because success is the only revenge that matters. His fund has invested in 43 companies so far. 38 are profitable. 5 are unicorns. Startups worth over $1 billion. He changed venture capital by betting on people the industry had overlooked. Marcus Morrison, Peter's uncle, retired quietly after the scandal. He lives in the Hamptons now, rarely giving interviews. When asked about Peter, he says the same thing every time. I failed him. I knew he was struggling and I didn't help. I thought giving him responsibility would fix him. But you can't fix someone who won't admit they're broken. I wish I'd paid more attention. I wish I'd seen what was happening. He donated $50 million to domestic violence prevention programs. It doesn't fix what happened. But it's something. The Morrison Tech Building in Boston was sold and demolished. A park stands there now, funded by Julieth, designed by landscape architects who specialize in memorial spaces. There's a plaque near the entrance that reads, "For everyone who survived what tried to kill them. Your story doesn't end where someone else wanted it to." People visit that park who've never heard of Julieth Morrison or Peter or what happened in the Swiss Alps. They sit on benches and eat lunch and watch their children play. They have no idea they're sitting in the ruins of an empire built on murder and betrayal. But Julieth knows. And that's enough. Last year, Julieth went back to Switzerland. Back to the Alps. Back to the mountain where she fell. She hired a guide and hiked to the approximate location where she'd landed. Impossible to find exactly, but close enough. The snow was pristine. Untouched. No evidence that anything terrible had ever happened there. She stood at the spot where she'd almost died and thought about the woman she'd been. The woman who trusted too easily. Who gave up too much. Who believed love meant sacrifice instead of partnership. That woman was gone. Dead and buried in the snow. The woman standing here now was something else entirely. Do you have any regrets? A journalist asked Julieth during a TED Talk last year. She thought about it. Really thought about it. I regret marrying someone who saw me as an obstacle instead of a partner, she said. I regret not recognizing the signs earlier. I regret 3 years of my life I'll never get back. She paused. But do I regret what happened after? The fall, the struggle, the building? No. Because that experience taught me something essential. You're only as powerless as you believe you are. Peter tried to kill me because he thought I was weak. Expendable. Worth less than $20 million. He was wrong about all of it. The audience gave her a standing ovation. So here's my final question for you. Looking at where everyone ended up. Peter in prison, Julieth running a billion-dollar empire, lives saved and changed by her foundation. Do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of choices? Peter chose murder and got 45 years. Julieth chose survival and got everything. Is that divine justice? Universal balance? Or just the mathematical result of their decisions? I want to hear what you think in the comments. Because Julieth Morrison's story isn't just about revenge or business or survival. It's about what happens when you refuse to let someone else write your ending. It's about taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and transforming it into the best thing you ever built. It's about falling 10,000 feet and landing on your feet. So what does Julieth Morrison's story really teach us? It's not about revenge. That's the easy takeaway, but it's not the right one. It's not even about survival, though that's part of it. This story is about something deeper. Something more fundamental about what it means to be human. Julieth Morrison fell 10,000 feet because someone decided she was worth less than money. That's the core of it. Peter looked at a brilliant woman, a woman who loved him, who'd built security systems that protected millions of people, who'd given up her career because she trusted him, and decided she had a dollar value. $20 million to be exact. And when that calculation made more sense than partnership, he pushed. But here's what Peter didn't understand. You can't assign value to a person. You can't reduce a human being to a number on an insurance policy. Because people aren't assets to be liquidated when they become inconvenient. They're not obstacles to be removed when they make you feel inadequate. They're not solutions to your problems or stepping stones to your success. Peter tried to treat Julieth like a transaction. And in doing so, he destroyed himself. Julieth gave a commencement speech at Harvard 2 years ago. She stood at the same university where she'd earned her scholarship, where she'd studied until 3 a.m. in the library, where she'd built the foundation of everything she became. The graduates expected a story about perseverance, about hard work paying off, about the American dream. Instead, she told them something different. The worst thing that ever happened to me, Julieth said, was also the best thing. Not because I'm glad it happened, I'm not. Not because I needed it to succeed, I didn't. But because it taught me something essential about who I am when everything is taken away. She paused. Let the words settle over 2,000 graduating students. You will fail. All of you. Probably multiple times. You'll lose jobs. Relationships will end. People you trust will betray you. Plans will collapse. Dreams will die. And in those moments you'll discover something crucial. You're not what happens to you. You're what you build from it. The speech went viral. 30 million views in the first week. It resonated with people who'd never heard of Secure Vault or Morrison Tech or helicopter murders. Because everyone knows what it feels like to fall. Maybe not 10,000 feet. Maybe not from attempted murder. But everyone has experienced betrayal. Loss. The moment when the ground disappears and you're falling through empty air. Julieth's story matters because she shows us what comes after the fall. Here's what she says when people ask for advice. Don't let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you are. Not a partner. Not a boss. Not society or family or circumstances. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. If someone treats you like you're disposable, believe them, and walk away. Don't wait for them to change. Don't sacrifice yourself trying to prove your value to someone who's already decided you're worthless. And when you fall, because you will fall, don't stay down. Get up. Claw through the snow if you have to. Build something so extraordinary that the person who pushed you becomes a footnote in your success story. The Second Chances Foundation now operates in 60 countries. Last year alone, they helped 32,000 domestic violence survivors leave dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. 32,000 women who looked into someone's eyes and saw what Julieth saw in Peter's. Calculation instead of love. 32,000 women who chose survival over submission. Some of them built businesses. Some became doctors or lawyers or engineers. Some just wanted safety and stability and a home without fear. All of them learned the same lesson Julieth learned in the Swiss Alps. You're stronger than what tried to kill you. Julieth doesn't think about Peter much anymore. Not out of forgiveness. She still hasn't forgiven him, might never forgive him. But out of irrelevance. Peter's opinion stopped mattering the moment he pushed her from that helicopter. His approval, his validation, his assessment of her worth. All of it became meaningless. He wanted me dead so he could have money and status, Julieth told an interviewer. I wanted to live so I could build something meaningful. We both got what we wanted most. That tells you everything about who we were. The journalist asked one final question. If you could go back and change what happened, prevent the fall, stay married, avoid all of it, would you? Julieth thought for a long time. No, she said finally. Because that woman who climbed into the helicopter? She was brilliant, but she didn't know her own power. She was capable, but she'd been convinced she needed someone else to validate her. She was strong, but she'd never been tested. The woman I am now knows what she's capable of. Knows that survival is a choice. Knows that the only validation that matters is the kind you give yourself. So no, I wouldn't change it. Because I like who I became on the other side of impossible. Here's what I want you to take from Julieth Morrison's story. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself when you have every reason to give up. Success isn't about destroying the people who tried to destroy you. It's about building something so remarkable that their opinion becomes irrelevant. And falling, whether from a helicopter or a failed business or a broken relationship, isn't the end of your story. It's just the moment that separates who you were from who you're becoming. Peter Morrison pushed his wife from a helicopter for $20 million. Julieth Morrison survived, built a $6 billion empire, and saved thousands of lives. One of them measured worth in money. The other measured it in meaning. One of them is serving 45 years in federal prison. The other is changing the world. That's not karma. That's not divine justice. That's not even revenge. That's just the mathematical result of their choices. Peter chose destruction. Julieth chose creation. And the universe delivered exactly what they'd asked for. So the next time someone tries to tell you what you're worth, remember Julieth Morrison. Remember the woman who fell 10,000 feet and refused to die. Remember that the person who pushes you is already falling. They just don't know it yet. And remember that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so extraordinary that your survival becomes their life sentence. Let's bring this full circle. Julieth Morrison climbed into a helicopter on her 3rd wedding anniversary, thinking she was celebrating love. Instead, her husband pushed her 10,000 feet to her death for insurance money. She survived. Built a $6 billion empire. Saved thousands of lives. And turned the man who tried to kill her into a footnote in her extraordinary story. From fishing village poverty to Harvard scholarship to attempted murder to billionaire CEO, Julieth's journey is extreme. Most of us will never fall from a helicopter or run a tech empire. But we've all felt what she felt in that moment before Peter pushed. The realization that someone you trusted sees you as expendable. As worth less than their comfort or money or ego. We've all experienced betrayal. Loss. The moment when everything you believed about someone shatters. And Julieth's story shows us what's possible on the other side of that devastation. This isn't really a story about revenge, though revenge plays a part. It's not even about business success, though the business success is undeniable. This is a story about refusing to accept someone else's assessment of your worth. Peter decided Julieth was worth $20 million dead. Julieth decided she was worth building a life so extraordinary that his opinion became meaningless. One of them was right. The bigger lesson here, the one that applies to everyone watching this, is simple. People will underestimate you. They'll dismiss you. They'll try to convince you that you're less than you are. Sometimes it's subtle. A boss who overlooks you for promotions. A partner who diminishes your ambitions. A family member who reminds you of your failures. Sometimes it's catastrophic. Like being pushed from a helicopter. But the response is the same. Prove them wrong by building something they can't ignore. Not for them. For you. Julieth Morrison could have died in that snow. Should have died, statistically speaking. But she clawed through 8 feet of snow with broken bones because staying alive was the only revenge that mattered. She could have reported Peter and hoped for justice. Instead, she built an empire that made his crimes look pathetic. She could have spent the rest of her life bitter and broken. Instead, she created a foundation that saved thousands of women from the fate she escaped. Every choice she made was about creation, not destruction. That's why her story matters. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and worth, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. What part of Julieth's journey resonated most with you? Was it the survival? The business comeback? The way she transformed pain into purpose? I read every single comment, and your insights make this community special. Your stories matter too. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. You are not defined by what others think of you. You're defined by how you respond when life tests you. Julieth Morrison proved that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so beautiful that your critics become irrelevant. Peter Morrison is serving 45 years in prison. Julieth Morrison is changing the world. Their choices determined their destinies. Your choices will determine yours. So whatever you're facing right now, whatever betrayal, whatever loss, whatever moment of falling through empty air, remember this. Survival is a choice. Success is a choice. Your worth is a choice you make every single day when you decide to keep building despite everything trying to tear you down. Stay strong. Stay focused. And never let anyone convince you that you're nothing. You're everything you choose to become. Until next time. I am the Story Keeper.